Campaign finance. The Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925 was the first attempt at the federal level to regulate campaign finances. This act arose after the so-called Teapot Dome scandal during the Harding administration. This act was not particularly effective in limiting campaign contributions and corruption that stemmed from it. A new act, the Political Activities Act, also known as the Hatch Act of 1939, was the next major attempt to limit federal campaign finances. This act arose out of the New Deal reform era. During that time, some of the government employees perhaps overstepped their boundary and engaged too passionately and too much in political campaigning. So the Political Activities Act, or the Hatch Act, banned partisan political activities by all federal government employees except President, Vice President, and Senate-confirmed political appointees. The Hatch Act also limited the amount of money a group could spend on an election by placing a $5,000 cap on a contribution from an individual or from a group. However, groups got around this limitation by simply breaking themselves into smaller groups or subgroups, and then each subgroup could contribute up to $5,000, and thereby they would exceed the original intent to limit contributions to $5,000. Is money speech? The Supreme Court believed so. We got our first clear indication of that in 1976, that when it comes to politics, money is indeed speech. In Buckley versus Valeo, the Supreme Court held that a candidate can spend as much of his own money as he wants on his political campaign because of the First Amendment's protection of freedom of speech. In other words, a candidate could zealously and tirelessly advocate his views and his candidacy, and in the modern world, this is impossible to do without spending money. So if you want to spend as much of your own money as you wish on promoting yourself or your candidacy, your positions, you can do so. This decision became a background or a precedent for an even more dramatic Supreme Court decision more than 3 decades later. That decision was Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. The Supreme Court held that independent expenditures cannot be limited as long as they're not coordinated with the candidate and or his political campaign, and the money does not go directly to the candidate and or his campaign, but is rather spent independently by the group. So let's assume that you're a group and you want to spend a lot of money and you don't want to be limited by congressional law and the regulations of the Federal Election Commission, because this is how campaign finance is regulated, by laws made by Congress and by regulations issued by the Federal Election Commission in pursuance of those laws. So let's say you do not want limitations. Let's say you want to spend endless amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars as a group. How do you do that? You spend without coordinating your expenditures with any candidate, and you do not give money directly to a candidate or his campaign. You just spend that money yourself. And the reason why the Citizens United decision was so important is because it removed the previous restriction that did not allow unlimited spending if you mentioned the candidate by name, if you said vote for or vote against. Now such restriction does not exist. So as a group, you can spend unlimited amount of money and say, vote for this candidate or don't vote for that candidate. You can do that without any restrictions on spending as long as you do not coordinate your message with another candidate and do not give money to his campaign directly. So super PACs have been formed in order to facilitate this type of expenditures. And super PAC spending is therefore unlimited. Super PACs are different from PACs. PACs stand for Political Action Committees. Political Action Committees are regulated. Why are they regulated? They're regulated because they give money directly to candidates and or their campaigns. So if you contribute directly, then your expenditures can be limited. If you don't contribute directly, then what you have is a super PAC and not a PAC, and your expenditures are not limited. Why PACs or super PACs in the first place? Who creates them? Answer: corporations and labor unions. Why? Because this allows them to pool resources that otherwise would be scattered, and thereby to maximize their clout. So PACs and super PACs collect money from, be it union members or be it employees, whatever they are, and then they bundle this money collectively, and this increases their leverage because they can give more money. The only difference is that since PACs give directly to candidates of their campaigns, they're limited on how much money they can give. And super PACs do only independent expenditures, and they're not limited. Soft money is money for party building activities like voter registration drives. Almost all soft money has been banned by the McCain-Feingold Act of 2002, formerly known as the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act, or BCFRA. It outlawed almost all soft money contributions. So if soft money doesn't work, what can happen if you're not yet a corporation or a union, and you cannot form a super PAC because you're not a corporation or a union? Don't worry. You can form a new group without being a corporation or a union, and then have a super PAC. So you can form either a 527 or a 5101 parenthesis C4 group. The difference between 527s and 501c4s is that 501c4s do not have to disclose the lists of their donors. So this is so-called dark money. People can contribute to these 501c4s, and then 501c4 PACs give money, spend money rather, on independent expenditures. 527s have more leverage in operating, but they must disclose their donors. 501c4s may be only organizations whose purpose is to promote social welfare. So, for example, Crossroads GPS, which is a conservative 501c4, says that it exists in order to educate people, to make them participate in a more massive way, and so it doesn't have to disclose its list of donors, even though the whole purpose of this particular 501c4 is to actually push for the election of Republican candidates, and it has been very successful in that regard. And 527S has to disclose their list of donors because they are not non-profit charitable organizations, not non-profit social welfare organizations. But just like 501c4s, 527s also engage in unlimited independent expenditures. So what is the bottom line of all this? The bottom line is that while we can understand the position of the majority of the Supreme Court in equating money with speech in the 21st century, because if you want to be heard, chances are, I mean nationwide, I don't mean by your parents or by your neighbor. I mean, if you really want to be heard nationwide, you have to spend money, and in fact, a lot of money. But the problem is that this gives advantage to very well-financed interests. And the problem is that it floods the system with money, and it's not clear what kind of return we actually get for all that resource, all that money that's being spent. We still seem to continue to be electing between the same two parties, and we seem to be unsatisfied with either of them, judging by the public opinion polls. So look forward to the near and medium-term future, at least, of a lot of money in politics, perhaps more than ever, with rather dubious returns.